Greetings, family. This is Kyle Dixon here again for another post for Women's History Month. So, as before, this is a way to celebrate women and their achievements in our communities, locally, nationally, globally, right? So, my post for this time will be the legendary person that I definitely admire as far as her involvement in education and also political movements, grassroots movements, and that is Miss Ella Jo Baker. Yes, Ella Jo Baker. So Miss Baker was born in 1903 in Norfolk, Virginia, but her family quickly moved at a young age to North Carolina. Her father used to work on the shipyards, and there was a race ride around 1910 where white men were basically fighting and harassing and trying to kill black men on the shipyard. So to avoid all that nonsense and foolishness, they moved to North Carolina, where she ended up being raised. And she was raised up around her maternal grandmother, and her maternal grandmother was once an enslaved person. So her grandmother would tell her stories about how the enslaver owner would try to actually have her marry a man against her will, and she fought back. She fought back. So at a young age, Ella was raised with that spirit of being able to resist oppression and resist discrimination. She was raised around a lot of women, women on her mom's side. So she was nurtured in that tradition of being able to resist our oppressors and resist the systems that are used to discriminate us. So she did well in school. She ended up going to Shaw University in Raleigh, North Carolina, HBCU. They said she did very well there, which is not a surprise. And even there were some rules that she didn't agree with on campus, she sought to correct them. So again, this tradition, as you'll notice, this tradition of her resisting against things that are maybe heavily patriarchal or classist, which she did not mess with. That was one of the main things when I was doing my research on her, was that she was definitely heavily against centralized leadership. She felt that leadership started from the bottom up, very grassroots. The people are what made the movements, and not the people who were like the leaders, so-called leaders of the movement. She was heavily against it being heavily patriarchal and wanted to allow more women and youth to be involved. So once she graduated from Shaw, she moved to New York, where she got involved in a number of social movements. One was in reference of the based in Harlem, right? So she's around New York and Harlem during the time, and very much involved in the social movements that were going on, like Italy's invasion of Ethiopia. She spoke out against that. She spoke out against the Scottsboro Boys case, which a group of African American brothers were accused of raping two white women, which was highly unlikely, and also they did not do it. Just know that they didn't do it. They were falsely accused for doing that act. When she spoke out against that, she spoke out against the injustices that they were facing down there. And also the group that she was involved with in New York was, she was involved in the Negro National News. She was an editor assistant. And out of Negro National News, one of the journalists, George Schuler, started this organization based around the empowerment of socioeconomic status of African Americans in Harlem, but also like in New York City, in other places connected to Harlem, communities connected to Harlem. So she was involved in that and quickly became like a national director. And then after that, she became involved in NAACP. So in the NAACP, she was very much a part of galvanizing the people on the grassroots, the men and the women, also pushing for less centralized leadership. This is where it really became in the forefront. She was really pushing for leadership to be more grassroots, get more youth involved. And out of that, she actually created a conference because of her disagreement, but also her annoyance of just constantly trying to push that agenda and trying to get those things restructured. She decided to create a conference of young people. A lot of the sit-ins that were happening around during that time, young people sitting in at lunch counters to fight against discrimination in places that were segregated, especially food places, delis, diners, etc. She knows that they need to be organized, so she put a conference together inviting all the the key members of the sit-ins to conference in one place in North Carolina, and out of that came the SNCC movement, SNCC, the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee. And they call her the godmother of that, right? She helped to encourage and organize the youth, and people like Diane Nash and Julian Bond attended and were very inspired by her pushing them to take ownership of their protests and their movements, and not having it felt like by charismatic leadership feel like they could tell them what to do. She actually even spoke out against a little bit about Dr. King. Now, she was older than a lot of these young up-and-coming civil rights leaders, so she felt like she had, not seniorism, but seniority, but more so she just knew better. And she realized that Dr. King, she felt at that time Dr. King was more of a great orator than actual a leader. They quoted her as saying like feet of clay, meaning that they were moving too slow. They need to move faster and help organize the people. And she was very much about the people. That's one thing I definitely know about Ella Baker. She was always talking to the young folks, always talking to the women, always talking to the people in the community, eating at their kitchen tables, hanging out and talking with them about issues and problems in the community, talking to young folks, encouraging them to be their best, to fight against the system of discrimination and oppression. Just always around the people, always talking with the people, always encouraging the people. She was constantly about that, constantly throughout her life, even to her very death. But she ended up organizing those folks, our people, and then from there she also started to get into other social movements. Like she was a part of SCLC, the Southern Christian Leadership Conference. She was a part of that, and again, her frustration with what she called kind of like the black church structure, meaning that you have a lot of female members, but then you have male leadership, and she was heavily disagreeable with that. She said, look, we got to break that up, right? No one person should be the leader. This should be, the people leading the movement on the ground, and the leadership is just a representation of those people, but they are not the end all and be all of the movement. She even called Martin Luther King out, said, Martin, you didn't make the movement made you. So that was her criticism of the young Dr. King. And other folks too, like she called out other folks as well. Coming out of the SCLC, helping creating SNCC, they called her Fundi. That's another important thing. One of her nicknames was Fundi, which is a Bantu, comes from the Bantu family of African languages, which means a craftsman, someone who's highly skilled and able to teach those skills to someone else. So that was the name that the students gave her, which is highly appropriate for her legacy. So Ella Baker ended up doing a lot of things. She ended up getting involved in other women groups and other political movements. Going into the 60s, late 60s, she worked with a small group in reference of lobbying for JFK to pass a lot of the proposed laws dealing with, again, discrimination and segregation. She worked with a group that combined black and whites that fight against racial oppression, to teach Southern whites the evils of racism, right? And even going into the 70s, she helped to support Angela Davis for a Free Angela Davis campaign. So I'm being long-winded, but the more of the story is this, right? The key points of this. Ella Baker was someone that I truly admire. She's someone that I'm highly respectful towards her legacy and her spirit. And she's one of those people, when I found out about her, she inspired me to be an advocate for the youth, to encourage the youth, to let them realize that a lot of these things that are happening in our society, we can help combat them, and but we don't have to necessarily lead them by telling them what to do, but we can encourage them and allow them to lead themselves and give them power, empower them to lead themselves and create their own movements from the ground up. So again, do your research on Ella Baker. I got much more to share, right? And again, I apologize for this being a long video, but this ancestor deserves a lot more time than I'm giving her, and that's why you should definitely do your own research. You'll find out much more about her. So thank you for listening, family. Again, more to come. Peace and blessings. Salute.